I am about to tell you what will happen in Ukraine. Of course, you want to know why you should believe me. Well, one reason is I understand why the Russians don't trust the West. Russian mistrust of the West underlies everything going on in Ukraine. Russia does not trust the West because of the cultural differences. American Christianity, at its most pious, was bohemian compared to the Russian Orthodox Church. Russia has learned from history they cannot trust the West. Even before Russia was modern Russia, they learned they could not trust the West. The four horses in St. Mark's Square in Venice were looted from Eastern Orthodox churches in Constantinople by Roman Catholics. The Crimean War may be the ultimate example, although I will admit, as I read Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August, I realized that the Russian front, the defeat of Russia in World War I, saved France. And what did Russia get in return? Oh, the end of the Romanov monarchy. Russia does not trust the West because they believe we cannot sustain this war effort. The perfect anecdote for this is the story of a KGB general during the Cold War who was informed that several recruits had frozen to death during winter maneuvers. He was furious. This man had gone through the Great War. He promptly gave his subordinate generals old school greatcoats and sent them out to spend the night in the Moscow winter. The Russians do not believe the West can sustain a war. The Russians are very well aware Ukraine is not in our backyard, and they do not trust the West to continue their support of Ukraine. France is burning. Look at American politics. We are more divided than ever. They do not believe that that the West will sacrifice for something that's not in its backyard. And when we come back, I will explain how the events of the past week prove me right about what will come up next in Ukraine. And we're back. During the past week, the Ukrainians hit the Kerch Bridge, damaging Russian supply lines. The Russians turned around and ended the Black Sea grain export, cutting the supply lines of grain to billions of people around the world. But this is not about the grain. The grain is a red herring. This is really more about whose backyard this is in. The AP reported that Ukraine will now shift some grain exports through Eastern Europe, through Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria, which is great news for the world, but not for those countries. You see, the grain passing through those countries, the AP reported, will destabilize the local agricultural economies. Now, that's very significant because these countries are supporters of Ukraine. Poland has taken in vast amounts of Ukrainian refugees. And the AP reported also this past week that Bulgaria just sent 100 Soviet-era APCs to Ukraine. Basically, the Russians think they can fight leaner and meaner than the West. They believe they fight leaner. The weapon technology level is a good example. The weapons that they use are churned out upwards of thousands in a day. The weapons we use, the Javelin missile, we upped the production to 10 a day. They believe they're meaner You just look at how they hit the cathedral and how they have not been avoiding civilian casualties. I think they're wrong. I think, and we have evidence. The U.S. and NATO have adapted the weapons they're sending to Ukraine. They've adapted cluster bombs. Cluster bombs are definitely meaner. And we've been sending older weapon systems. As far as meaner goes, um, let's see. Oppenheimer is in the theaters right now, and I don't think it gets much meaner than the atomic bomb. Furthermore, some would actually argue that the fire bombings of Hamburg and Tokyo were meaner. The stories from those fire bombings literally I do not feel comfortable sharing them. So we are leaner and meaner than the Russians. But that belief will shape what comes up next in Ukraine. And when we come back, I will tell you exactly what the Russians are going to do next in Ukraine. And we're back. As you look at the news coming out of Ukraine, you can expect, first, high-profile attacks. These could be on port facilities and on grain storage facilities, as we have seen in the past week. These could be involving citizens or cultural landmarks, as we have seen in the past week. But this is just to grab headlines. The real action will take place on the front lines. The Ukrainian counteroffensive has been stalled by Russian minefields and artillery killing zones that they've built. Classic Soviet military doctrine dictates that if a unit on the front line is under pressure or has even been overrun, you do not reinforce it. Instead, you surmise that the enemy has pulled troops from elsewhere along the front or committed their reserves. Therefore, you proceed to attack in another area you push forward while they're occupied. And that is what the Russians are going to do. Now, this is not going to be Cannae or Cowpens. They're not going to try double envelopment. We could see it probably won't. They will probably try to be low-key about this. You could see increased drone and missile attacks elsewhere on the front. You could see small pushes.
The dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight last gleaming, whose stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land dimly seen through the mist of the deep, where the foes of the host in dread silence reposes. What is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half concealed, half discloses? Now it catches